Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably the most elaborate, violent, and just absolutely profound story in all of ancient Egyptian mythology. We're talking about the Epic of Osiris. And look, this isn't just some simple fairy tale. It's a foundational narrative that survived for thousands of years, evolving from these really cryptic spells carved deep into pyramid walls, all the way to massive state-sponsored festivals.
So what are we actually looking at here? It's a sweeping saga of royal betrayal, incredibly powerful magic, and a multi-generational war that literally shaped a civilization. The ancient Egyptians used this one massive story to tackle the big stuff, the very nature of existence, profound family loyalty, terrifying chaos, and the ultimate triumph of order.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the murder of Osiris.
Our story kicks off in Egypt's mythical prehistory. Think of it as this golden age where the gods actually physically ruled the earth as kings. The primeval king was Osiris, and the most crucial thing to know about him is that his reign perfectly embodied maat. Maat is this ancient Egyptian concept of absolute harmony, truth, and cosmic order. Basically, as long as Osiris sat on the throne, the crops grew, the sun rose, and society just clicked along in perfect, peaceful harmony.
But you can't have a good story without a villain, right? To really understand the conflict, we have to look at Osiris's brother, Set. Set represented the complete opposite of civilized rule. Where Osiris is the life-giving, fertile land right along the Nile, Set is the harsh, barren desert. Where Osiris brings righteous order, Set brings unpredictable chaos and just raw, forceful violence. This sibling rivalry is literally the eternal struggle between order and disorder.
So, in a wildly violent usurpation, Set murders his brother Osiris, and it gets worse. Later traditions tell us that Set brutally chops Osiris's body into exactly 42 pieces and scatters them all across the land. Now, why 42? Well, it's not a random number. Ancient Egypt was divided into exactly 42 provinces. By burying a piece of Osiris in each one of them, the murdered god of kingship literally became the physical embodiment of the Egyptian kingdom itself. Pretty incredible, right?
Which brings us to part two, the magic of Isis.
With the world completely plunged into chaos, the narrative shifts to Osiris's incredibly devoted wife, Isis. As the ultimate archetype of a mourner, she searches desperately to recover her husband's scattered remains. And once she finds them, she essentially invents the very first mummy. Teaming up with her sister Nephthys and the jackal god Anubis, she embalms the corpse, magically halting the decay. Then, taking the form of a falcon, she literally fans the breath of life back into Osiris, just long enough to magically conceive their divine heir, Horus.
But here's the catch. Osiris's revival in the physical world isn't permanent. He has to descend into the underworld to become the eternal king of the Duat. That's the distant, mysterious, and magical realm of the dead. And this means he has to leave his vulnerable newborn son Horus behind in the land of the living. To protect him from his murderous uncle, Isis is forced to hide her baby deep in the dense papyrus thickets of the Nile Delta.
Let's move on to part three, the battle for Egypt. Fast forward past Horus's childhood, and the adult son finally emerges from hiding. He is ready to officially challenge his uncle Set for the throne. And guys, this sparks an exhausting 80-year divine feud. It was equal parts brutal combat and absurd legal drama. For 8 decades, they battle it out in front of a jury of creator gods. They race boats, they transform into hippos to fight in the river, and they constantly appeal to the older gods to step in and arbitrate.
Now, what's truly remarkable here is how the Egyptian texts portrayed these supposedly all-powerful deities. They gave them petty, absolutely hilarious human flaws. Egyptologist Donald Redford points this out perfectly. He notes that stories from this era portray Horus as a clever, tricky Puck-like figure, and Set as this huge, strongman buffoon. Oh, and Osiris? He is an articulate curmudgeon with an acid tongue. It wasn't just high-minded religious text. This was vivid, highly entertaining reality TV for the ancient Egyptian citizen.
But make no mistake, the fighting gets incredibly ugly. They inflict terrible mutilations on one another. Set loses his virility, and Horus loses his left eye, violently torn out by his uncle. Now, because Horus is a sky deity, his left eye represents the moon. So the theft of his eye actually symbolizes the terrifying, pitch-black darkness of a lunar eclipse. Thankfully, the eye is eventually magically restored by the god Thoth, which returns light to the sky and heals the cosmic order.
Ultimately, Horus triumphs, successfully restoring Ma'at to the universe. But, the ancient Egyptians really loved balance, so sometimes the world's dualities were neatly divided between the two rivals. In some versions of this divine peace treaty, Horus gets the earth and the fertile lands of Lower Egypt, while Set is banished to rule the sky and the barren deserts of Upper Egypt. Order is, at long last, restored.
Okay, so now that we've seen this incredible drama unfold, from the bloody betrayal all the way to the cosmic courtroom, we really have to ask ourselves, what actually inspired this bizarre and violent epic? Where did the ancient Egyptians pull this story from? Was it just pure imagination, or is there real history buried beneath all that magic?
Let's pull back the curtain in Part 4, Roots of the Epic Myth.
In ancient Egypt, myth and reality were practically the exact same thing. If we trace its evolution, we see this story slowly coalesce over thousands of years. It starts out as fragmented, super cryptic tomb inscriptions known as the pyramid texts, but by the Middle Kingdom, it's so incredibly popular that everyday citizens are reenacting it in massive annual festivals. And by the Roman era, it's been thoroughly documented as a cohesive global narrative by writers like Plutarch. It literally grew from local folklore into a world religion.
Scholars today believe the myth is essentially a giant historical blunder. It mixes deep cultural memories of ancient civil wars with the actual agricultural cycle of dying and rising crops along the Nile. During the real, historical unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, there were actual rival factions that worshipped Horus and Set. So the war between the gods echoes a very real, very bloody political conflict that eventually forged a united kingdom.
Which brings us to our final section, shaping Egyptian life and death.
So how did this myth leap off the temple walls to dictate the daily lives of millions of people? Well, first, it established the literal, real-world blueprint for royal succession. It ensured peaceful transitions of power by turning every living king into Horus, the rightful avenging son. But when that king died, he didn't just vanish. He transformed into Osiris, ruling the afterlife. That meant the transfer of power from father to son wasn't just political. It was a sacred, recurring, cosmic cycle.
But the true magic of this story, it eventually democratized salvation. Ordinary people began to realize that they too could overcome death if they just followed Osiris's example. Because Isis embalmed Osiris, everyday Egyptians started embalming their own dead. That restored Eye of Horus, it became the ultimate, ubiquitous protective amulet. And maybe most importantly, this myth introduced the revolutionary idea that a human soul had to be judged as morally righteous to even enter the afterlife.
Basically, by walking in the mythological footsteps of this murdered god, absolutely anyone could achieve a blessed afterlife. Think about it. If you lived a virtuous life maintaining maat, received the proper funerary rites, and managed to pass that final posthumous trial by Osiris, death was no longer this terrifying, permanent end. It was simply a doorway to the duat, where you'd be welcomed into eternity.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. Does the legacy of Osiris, Isis, and Horus still shape the stories we tell today? When you consider that the image of Isis nursing baby Horus heavily influenced Greco-Roman mystery cults and undeniably echoes in the earliest icons of the Madonna and Child, you have to wonder, how much of this ancient Egyptian magic is still hiding in plain sight? The story of a dying god who conquers death to offer salvation to humanity, well, it's a narrative that has never truly left us. Think about that the next time you see a story of resurrection. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the myths.